This is Spartan 117.
Anyone hear me? Over.
Isolate that signal. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
Cortana, all I need to know is, did we lose them?
I think we both know the answer to that.
All right, yes, we are ready to go. Welcome back, everyone, to Finish the Fight, a Halo podcast. I am your host, Jesse Reiners.
And I am your host, Alex Kendall.
And before we even get started with this episode, last week we released episode 0, and you know, it's really cool to see people actually listening and, you know, giving us some feedback about it. So thank you once again. Now, today we are going to be going over the game that started it all. The reason that we have this podcast and we're here talking to you about Halo, which is Halo Combat Evolved. Now, Halo Combat Evolved is a first-person shooter that released November 15th, 2001 as the launch title for Microsoft's Xbox. It's not only regarded as the reason the Xbox was so popular, but also regarded as one of the greatest sci-fi shooters ever made. Over the course of 17 years, Halo has made over $5 billion with 14 games, 27 books, 9 comic series, and many other forms of media, including movies, shorts, tabletop games, toys, and even Mega Bloks, now Mega Constructs series. This all started with Halo Combat Evolved.
It's amazing to see like that this game has really taken off. It's hard to have a game series in general. But to see that, you know, Bungie had taken a leap in making a combat sci-fi shooter that has spanned almost 20 years and has just spawned off all of these crazy things just in pop culture and of itself and in the game. It's really amazing.
Well, it's also like a franchise going as long as, say, Halo. A lot of people still don't look back at, you know, the early stages or even the very first game. How many people talk about the first Far Cry or the first Fallout like they do now, you know? I don't know a lot of people that are very into those franchises that still occasionally like, I'm going to go play the first one, you know, 20 years ago or so. You know, they're very caught up in what's now. Combat Evolved is definitely a game that people to this day will still go back to and play, whether it's for nostalgic reasons or they just genuinely loved the game.
Exactly. And if you think of it even just graphically, you're basically going back in time to a lower resolution, but you still had that almost same combat feel that you're getting in some of these later games today. I mean, look at if you're talking about game franchises, look at Grand Theft Auto, the original, till now, from this crazy kind of top-down, weird style game to the third person that it is now. I mean, it's a huge shift. And like you said, that's not a game I really want to go back, you know, for nostalgia purpose, I'd love to play through that entire game again. Like, it doesn't have that same hold.
No, yeah. So that's why I think like a game like Halo Combat Evolved has, you know, stood out above the rest when it comes to the beginning of famous franchises to this day. So to give a summary of the game, which is what is officially on the back of the game, it says, and I quote, "You are the last of your kind, bred for combat, built for war. You are the master of any weapon, pilot of any vehicle, and fear no enemy. Bent on humankind's extermination, a powerful fellowship of alien races known as the Covenant is wiping out Earth's fledgling interstellar empire. You and the other surviving defenders of a devastated colony world make a desperate attempt to lure the alien fleet away from Earth. Shot down and marooned on the ancient ring world, Halo, you begin a guerrilla war against the Covenant. Fight for humanity against an alien onslaught as you race to uncover the mysteries of Halo." Before we go any further into the game itself, we're going to talk about the company that started it. Now, Bungie Incorporated is an American video game developer based in Bellevue, Washington. The company was established May 1991 by Alex Seropian, who later brought in programmer Jason Jones after publishing Jones' game Minotaur, The Labyrinths of Crete. Which, by the way, I would love to do an episode where we talk about all the old Bungie games.
All right, let's do it.
I think that would be very interesting, because I've never played any of them. You've said you've played some of those, right?
I've played Myth.
Played Myth? How was that?
Don't remember.
Don't remember? Give me a quick... So you don't remember anything about it?
Mm-mm.
God damn it.
No, I wish I could tell you, but I literally don't remember. I played it in school.
All right, well, one of these days, I promise you we will. Originally based in Chicago, Illinois, the company concentrated on Macintosh games during its early years and created 2 successful video game franchises called Marathon and Myth. Now, a funny thing I found about the early days, when audio director Martin O'Donnell first started working at Bungie, he had this to say, quote, Bungie was a total seat-of-the-pants operation at the time. It was a scrappy place, a bunch of guys, pizza boxes, and sweat socks on the floor. It was like walking into the frat house or a dorm or something. So I was the professional, and they were like a bunch of kids, just goofing around. That was the impression I got. And then Max Hoberman, former series lead for Bungie, had this to say about Marty. We used to call Marty the elder statesman, just to remind him he was old. I kind of like that idea that they seemed very lax, especially in the beginning, which later we'll find out maybe wasn't the best approach. But I still like that they had that kind of idea of just like goofing around at work. Because, you know, you hear about like these firms that are like super like uptight, you know, and you learn later when they go with Microsoft that it was such a very awkward blend, you know.
Well, it's interesting. It's great to hear, especially like being kind of a creative field, that people really don't know what they're doing to start. You just kind of like, you just kind of go into it. You just jump into it. You do what you got to do. You don't have the money to start. So like I said, just pizza and whatever around. Like it's
I love that there were socks apparently. Yeah. At one point a dude's just like, fuck these socks. I'm taking off my dirty socks.
Well, that's like when you're working on something for like 20 hours, you're like, well, I'll just take these off, take a nap. Here we go.
Which we'll learn, you know, at one point they were working 20 hours on Halo a day. Now, a lot of people do know this, but at the same time, a lot of people don't know this. When Halo was first starting to get worked on, it wasn't a first-person shooter at all. You know, it wasn't a shooter at all. It was actually an RTS game. So, Bungie was working on the sequel to their game Myth. So they decided that they were going to take the guts of that game and they wanted to make a sci-fi version of it. This version, though, was going to be different than Myth because it was going to have vehicles.
And it was codenamed, it had several code names as it was going along. One being Armor, one being Monkey Nuts, my favorite there, and then Blam. The change from Monkey Nuts to Blam was so that co-founder Jason Jones wouldn't have to tell his mom he was working on a game called Monkey Nuts, which I think she probably appreciated.
So what game is your son working on? He's working on a monkey game.
Oh, neat. What's it called? Oh, Monkey Nuts.
Monkey Nuts. So I had never played StarCraft. You said you had played StarCraft, right? Apparently this game was going to take huge inspiration from StarCraft.
And from everything they've shown through either little documentaries or some videos of the early Bungie days, it definitely felt that way. It was kind of that 3/4 top-down, scroll across your map, typical RTS, but specifically at this realm was taking on the kind of space elements that StarCraft already had.
Yeah. And so as well as this game wasn't going to have a story. It was just going to be a multiplayer game. So it's crazy to see that, you know, games that are renowned for their story, you know, Halo at one point wasn't even going to have a game. You know, but Halo before Halo, no story. It was just going to be multiplayer, which is that kind of what StarCraft is like?
I mean, StarCraft, kind of like most RTSs, they do have a loose story with it. Like I said, I haven't played StarCraft in a while with it, but you have your different factions and you have kind of different elements within that. I mean, you even have like little campaigns through like Age of Mythology or Age of Empires, which are also RTSs that will kind of get you into those elements of it.
Yeah. So some of the AI that this game was going to feature, we had heavy troopers, which was infantry units and an early iteration of the Spartan 2s. There was going to be a toolbar used to select command. You were going to have ground blast, which was something unknown, but most likely scenery. You had aliens, which were, at the time, the precursors to the Covenant in the final game. You had a precursor to the Elephant, which later does not make an appearance until Halo 3. In fact, only Halo 3, and that's in the multiplayer. Now, some of the vehicles as well that they were going to have alongside of the Elephant, you had the Ghost, you had the Zetsu, which was a tank. You had a Hummer-like car, which was an early version of the Warthog. You had an alien tank it was an early iteration of what we now know as the Wraith. You have a Maowitzer, which is some kind of cannon. You had a Starfighter, which was some kind of aerial vehicle. any other vehicles that were included later, kind of came back within Halo Wars, along with the Wolverine, the Rhino, and the Cut Cougar. You as well had the Doozy, which was a single-player boat. Now, as they were developing this, one day, according to Bungie legend, a developer fixed a camera on the Warthog and drove it around. Everyone there was so entranced by it that they decided, well, we're just going to make third-person shooter then.
And then during the development process, at 4 p.m. every day, a 4v4 single elimination game would happen, and developers would play for 2 to 3 hours, just kind of getting really entranced and developed in their game, which is always great to see that developers like actually enjoy the game they're playing, and they're not just pushing out some product for, an investor or for a publisher, that they really love what they're doing.
Yeah. And again, now we have, I don't know what game testing was like back in 99, but nowadays we have, people who are working 12 or 16-hour shifts doing game, testing. But granted, it's not just having fun. It's how many times can I run in this corner before I can break through the corner and then run outside in the open world that isn't fully developed. Now, we're going to move on to 1999 Macworld. At this point, the first Halo trailer/demo was presented at Macworld 1999 by Steve Jobs himself. Bungie had gotten into Macworld because their, at the time, Vice President Peter Tamte was a former Apple employee. What sold Steve was Bungie's ability to render sunlight in real time. Once a point was made to Steve, he told them, okay, you're in. That point that they made was that Steve Jobs had said, listen, at Pixar, we can render 100 suns at once. And he, I think it was Jason Jones had said to him, yeah, but can you do this in real time? At that point, that's when Steve Jobs said, okay, you're in. He was impressed. And, Steve Jobs definitely wasn't wanting to work with anything that he didn't feel was like perfection or, very ahead of its time and advanced.
And I mean, that leads into like days before they were going to present this, they didn't even have a name for this game yet. They won over Steve Jobs with it. They were, super excited, but they really didn't have anything to present with it yet. And at first it was just going to be called Covenant. It was just going to be kind of right in your face of what you were working with, and it made sense. It made sense. But shortly afterwards, the name Halo was chosen, and at the time, no one liked.
But, Jason Jones loved it. And he felt it set the sense of mystery and where they were creating for their universe. So, then we get the trailer, which was, it was showing the old school Master Chief. His armor was vaguely similar, but also, a little different. I think it was a darker green. He had like a little mini gun. His visor was a little bigger, and it's just a quick through, Chief runs, and I don't know at the time if he was called Master Chief. I don't think so. You just had this character, and he ran into a Halo control room, and you still see a hologram of Halo. He runs into the precursors to the Elites, which were these kind of lizard-looking aliens that had horns coming out of their head. They had no armor, but they still had the swords. And so he leads them out, and then they proceed to do a quick battle. And then my favorite part at the end of the demo is Master Chief's character, who wasn't Master Chief at the time, waving a Bungie flag. And then as well, there was apparently a bug within this demo that at any given time during this presentation, this could have crashed, and it could have all been over. But luckily that did not happen, because if that did, maybe we wouldn't have had Halo. Maybe, people were just like, nope, I don't want to deal with this then.
Well, things like that, I mean, especially back then, now, at any point, I would say, but to have something like that happen during your demo just leaves such a sour taste in the mouth of fans or, potential fans at that point. You've had a number of games out there that are just buggy kind of junk coming out, and you could have just thrown this right on top of that pile.
Yeah. Well, it's actually ironic, we were talking about this bug and at Macworld with Steve Jobs. When he was presenting the first iPhone, he had to keep switching iPhones out because the ones he had in his hands were crashing. Because, at any point, nowadays it's a little different because they say this iPhone's going to be out a month. But, at the time, he had to keep switching it out, which I kind of think is pretty impressive for a guy like that to kind of do sleight of hand in front of an audience. And we all sold it. It's not the most popular phone.
Exactly. And it's great. I mean, and the biggest thing was that all that hype that built up around that really got people talking and really, really got people excited about Bungie as a studio itself.
Yeah, everyone was talking about the game from Bungie that looked and sounded different because it starts with that music, that Martin made that, we all know and love today. So Halo was going to be a huge step away from the shooters at the time. Whereas the former were closed into corridors, Halo was going to introduce us to vast open levels to the player in this shooter genre. Lots of people did not think, though, that Halo could potentially sell on the console because consoles at the time didn't compare to what PC shooters were.
I mean, you had games on PC like Unreal Tournament, Team Fortress, System Shock that really defined PC gaming. So it was super odd when a game like Halo going into a console realm. Because most console shooters, they were kind of on rails. Like you just kind of went down a corridor, did your thing, went to the next thing, and it kind of just kept it in tight so that it can kind of guide the player to where they set up their NPCs.
Yeah.
But Halo open that up, and you see it right after the first mission when you crash land, and it's just a wide open green landscape.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, get a little ahead of myself. But it is. It's one of those games where you start off in a ship, and then you're like, okay, so I'm in this ship and going around. It's
Which is,
open.
it has that, but it still has that rail kind of setting.
It still has the rail setting, as most games still do. And this was a little more traditional. But then when you get to that drop pod, and you're like, oh, I can go anywhere, and on this mission, I can complete any of the objectives in any order.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, especially, for the console shooters of the time.
Exactly.
But, this game, before, it changed to a first-person shooter, it still had a lot of Halo elements, as we had said before. But there's a lot of things that didn't make it into Combat Evolved. We could talk for the weapons at first. A few things they had. They had a spear gun because they were going to have underwater missions, which to this day is still a discussion that people talk about. Is that possible for Halo?
Please no.
Which is a discussion for another time. The short of it, Alex says no.
No, but give me a decent underwater mission. I will wait. If anyone out there can give me one, let me know.
They had the Gatling Gun, which later makes its way back into Halo 3 when you can unmount them. You had a machete, which is still to me crazy to think that they have machetes at one point in Halo. You actually had a very early version of the Mauler, something we did not see again until Halo 3. You had a certain kind of alien sniper rifle, which we don't get until Halo 2. You had a flamethrower. You also had an anti-air rocket launcher, different from the rocket launcher that we ended up with. You get the SMG, something we get later in Halo 2. You get the gravity wrench, which is kind of a two-handed gun that has basically what looks like a wrench on the end of it. From the demo video, I think it launches out plasma or energy or something. There's not a lot of info on it.
Interesting.
You also had a grenade launcher. Now, as for enemies, the Sharkoi was cut out, which we later find out it is a canon enemy. It's this, I think, 17-foot tall cyborg, and it has two horns coming out of its forearms.
Okay.
And so, there is some lore behind it that we'll go into eventually. The Sharkoi was essentially a remake of the Drenal enemy from the Marathon game, of course, another game developed by Bungie. We also had engineers in the original Halo, which would, we'd eventually get in Halo 3 ODST. There was also this giant worm that I'd seen a video of it. It looks like a rock, and then it comes out of the ground, and it's 30 or 40 foot tall, I think. And it had a bluish body. That's all I really could get out of that. I didn't know.
So just super odd for the universe, it feels like. Like it doesn't...
Yeah.
I'm glad they cut it because it seems like something that wouldn't fit in the scale of it.
Well, Halo's not a game to really have boss battles, really.
Exactly.
Other than Halo 5, and then I think we have Tartarus. Other than that, we don't really have boss battles. And then the Covenant Bomber, which was an aerial vehicle, was also cut. Now we're going to get into the buyout part of Bungie, their change of hands. Even though that there was hype for this game, Bungie was going broke, and they were about to go under, and they needed funding, and they needed to be bought. Once Bungie was acquired by Microsoft, they had moved to Seattle, and they were tasked with making Halo playable on the Xbox, even though the Xbox was only announced a few days before Bungie ever met with Microsoft.
Which is crazy. I mean, it's one of those things where even looking back when they announced, like, all right, so the Xbox is announced. Cool, Bungie, we need you to make something. Like, we like what you have. We really need it.
So take everything that you've just been doing and change the programming. Make it look the same. Just change the fucking program.
Just change it all if you could in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, which we find out later is 9 months, basically. They had to do this all in 9 months. So, after reading that, what complaints I did have about this kind of, I backed off a little bit because I was like, okay, they still made something great in 9 months. Now, the team wanted the players to feel as though they were truly a part of the game. So they decided to make that transition into first person because, you didn't really get you were looking through the eyes of this character unless you were first person. So another huge component about this is that they wanted to have the perfect controls. And PC shooters at the time were infinitely better controls than console controllers, which would you agree to this day?
Personally,
I have a lot of people. I've never met someone who's like, I like, who have played just as much of both of them and like, I like controllers more.
I grew up on console and knew it very well. And then when I was able to buy my own parts and buy my own computer, like definitely changed. Like being able to actually aim with a mouse as opposed to an analog stick is huge.
Man, see, is this something you can explain, or because I've played like no PC games.
Well, so basically, you can obviously on a controller, you can change your velocity and the way that the stick moves in your X and Y axis.
Yeah.
Now it's a little hard when you're running a gun and you got two sticks moving, so you're trying to like move this joystick basically to kind of position where you want your gun to be.
Yeah.
Whereas in a computer, think of it as your mouse pointer is your reticle, and you're basically just moving that however you want it to be.
Okay.
So it's easier to whip around, get pinpoint accuracy instead of kind of fumbling like with a little bit of a joystick up, down, left, right, trying to get that perfect shot lined.
Maybe one day I'll know, but not today. Now, another thing I liked about this, and we had talked about this, is how a lot of Microsoft employees, who weren't working for Bungie wanted in on Halo, but the Bungie employees were really territorial. You'd have someone say, hey, I really want in on this game. Can we have lunch sometime? And they would just be like, no, like you don't get in on this.
And it makes sense because, they've been working on this for a while. It's transitioned from an RTS top down to a third person to here. And it's been their blood, sweat, and tears and their own bootstraps getting it this far.
Yeah.
And to me, that may be a kind gesture, but if I'm doing all this work and these Microsoft employees are like, oh, I'd love to help, and then they get their name on this game, and they've done, they may do 5 months of work or something, even though I've done years.
Yeah.
It's just a big slap in the face.
Well, we talked about, this kind of, this not good blending of Bungie and Microsoft. They were all given cubicles at the time, and they said, we don't want this. We want like an open space to collaborate and everything. And Microsoft was hesitant about that because, only like higher ups got those kind of settings, and they were like, well, no, this is how we've been doing this. Like we need this kind of open setting. And I think at one point they gave them a different area to work in and they also hated it. So it's kind of ironic that they're like, we're broke, we need to get bought. Once they're acquired by Microsoft, then they kind of get this diva mentality. And I don't want to say diva, but that's the best way I guess I can describe it, even though I feel like that word has a negative connotation in this instance, but they have this mentality of like, cool, you got us. Now, if you want a good game, you have to work with us now. You have to give us what we need.
And it makes sense. Microsoft has, since Bill Gates started it, it's a huge company, and now we're in 99, 2000. It's a huge corporate company. And you're now being, okay, we have PC gaming, which they're not really doing anything with. There's other companies that are working on Windows doing that. And now they're saying, we want a console. Yeah. And we're buying game companies. And you're going to conform with how we do everything every day. So you're taking people who are used to this crazy, frat boy, fun, creative lifestyle and being like, all right, suit and tie it up, work in a cubicle, do it over chat, do it over email, and we'll figure it out. Yeah, and that didn't really fly with them. So it was a rough transition. And another thing that, made kind of things matters not worse, but kind of annoyed Bungie was that Microsoft felt Halo itself was not a good title. They didn't know what this game was. So they made them add Combat Evolved at the end. And Bungie hated that, but they didn't have a choice in this matter. That's why I say on the side of this game that I'm holding, it just says Halo. On the official soundtrack, it just says Halo. They fought tooth and nail to, make sure that
Combat Evolved appeared as little as possible, which I kind of find funny.
And I can appreciate that. Like we said, it's been their game forever. Do I think the change Microsoft added help? In a way, yes. Those two words help me know, okay, so this is some type of fighting game or something. And then seeing that there's a gun on the cover, all right, it's a shooter. It's a whole different way of doing it that wasn't, a Call of Duty, an Unreal Tournament, like anything like that. It's a different game.
Yeah. And so, as we had mentioned before, 90% of Combat Evolved was developed in 9 months, with developers working 16 to 20 hours days, 6 days a week. Now, as it was being developed, of course, at the 2000 E3, we saw the newer demo. We went from the third-person demo to now we have the first-person demo. And even though, for the most part, 90% of that demo was very similar to what we have now, there were a few differences. And one of the biggest differences, I'd say, was that the elites had shields and Master Chief's voice. We go to that part where he was basically a robot, if you remember hearing that,
Yeah. I mean, I guess when you're trying to plan it, you don't really have a voice. And it could have been, didn't have a voice actor, didn't have a real thing that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Wanted to make it more futuristic. I mean, it could have been anything. And then if you want to, dive a little bit more deeper into elites with shields. Now, everyone knows they have an overshield. But what did they have in this demo?
They had these arm-mounted shields like jackals, but elites were the only covenant that we see in this demo. And they were almost, the geometry was very just straight, and it was like, I think 2 or 3 triangles that made up the shape of this. It's very hard to describe this, on audio when we have no visuals for you at the time to show you. And in the demo, Master Chief snipes out. Again, I don't think at the time Chief, I could be wrong, Chief was still named. It was just a character. But, snipes out these elites, and these Marines work their way into this Forerunner architecture down to the basement levels. They get ambushed by elites, and so they get chased out. And whenever an elite's about to kill this final Marine, we hear the famous line, "Your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instrument." This comes from an elite. And then Chief, it's kind of silly, just Chief walks up out of nowhere with an energy sword and just stabs the elite, and then they're done. And then, we hear, again, Chief's very robotic voice, which at the time they didn't have Steve Downes for him, which I can only imagine where the franchise would be without Chief's iconic voice.
It's funny because looking back, seeing those banners at E3, seeing like Master Chief on those was such a cool thing to look back on. I'm seeing on Reddit, there's so much more Halo activity, and just seeing a lot of those things that people are posting from back then is just really cool to get that little nostalgia trip.
Yeah. And so one other kind of thing that I wanted to mention is that there were 2 enemies in this demo, or at least 1 or 2 that you didn't see later on. You had it was called a Thorn Beast. It basically looks like a Stegosaurus with like a little person's head.
Okay.
And then you had a Blind Wolf, which that's what they called it. It was or I think the official name is a Thorax, which both of these are canon creatures in the universe, And the Blind Wolf was almost like a Tyrannosaurus Rex with no eyes, tiny, and no arms. And I believe at one point this was a rideable thing within the third-person era of this game being developed. You could actually get on this thing and fucking hop around. Again, I always imagine what if these little things had stayed here and there.
And it would be fun if somehow in a forge or something, it's some secret unlockable that they just happen to like sneak in there, and you have to like do a certain input, and boom, you got Thorn Beasts.
You have Thorn Beasts now.
One of the really cool things that as Bungie's wrapping up development, they're going through and they're getting finished with the story and progressing and basically polishing things off. They came up with the idea that Master Chief at the time would need a companion.
Yeah.
So in their last game, Marathon, they had an AI named Durandal, which was named after a legendary French sword. So I am probably butchering that name.
No, I was actually going to say it completely different. So you're probably, I'm assuming how you pronounce things are right compared to how I pronounce things.
I'm sorry, French people. But since these swords came in 3, the other 2 names were Cortana and Joyeuse. Joyeuse?
Joyeuse. We're going to go with that.
Joyeuse. They went with the former Cortana because it's not a really hard name to say.
Yeah.
But also, just because it's a neat name. It's just an easy name to say. And like you said, it still goes with their trio of swords.
Well, I also think they said that the other one just sounded stupid.
It's dumb.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, too French.
It's too French for this.
Too French.
Which wouldn't have worked because Cortana was supposed to be British.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. And it's due to the voice actress Jen Taylor's former role playing a British actor that they dropped the accent.
Yeah. Again, what would it be like if Cortana was British? I actually don't think it would be much different.
Honestly, like the way her accent, if you want to say that's what it is now, it's already so prim and proper. In my head, I had to go through with her voice lines, be like, she's not British. She's just very prim and proper with it. And it's a unique voice to it.
Well, she still keeps some of those, she says, like, sawed off and all these other things. Now, when it came to creating Master Chief, which this actually kind of was interesting to me. Eric Nyland, the author of The Fall of Reach, actually came up with the name John when they were writing the book to act as the precursor to Halo Combat Evolved. But in the game, they didn't want people to know him as John. They wanted to give him a military rank. So after some research, they settled with Petty Officer Master Chief. Halo was being worked on and developed all up until the last minute. Multiplayer as well was something that was almost cut entirely. But, they say, oh, well, think of what would have happened. Mm-hmm. That's half of Halo right there. That's half of the reason it's so popular.
It is, and you can see how they kind of could have cut that in Halo 1. They had these kind of open maps through some vehicles and kind of had these open spaces like you do in the rest of the single player. But it would have changed. I think Halo would have not been as successful as it was without that multiplayer.
Absolutely not. But development was so crazy and hectic that at one point the question was asked, what are we cutting, the shotgun or the sniper rifle? Initially, the shotgun was cut, but a lot of the employees stayed late during the final weeks of development to make sure we got the shotgun.
Well, yeah, how else am I going to kill the Flood?
Not easily.
I'm not going to snipe him.
No. All right, so the game is getting ready to come out, and we have some marketing for the game. Now, even before, when it was still going to be on the Macintosh, it was on the cover of CGW as the next big thing. Mm-hmm. And I still think that saying that all throughout Combat Evolved's development, it still held true. No matter what, Halo was going to be the next big thing. Another trailer I really liked is for Halo before it had came to the Xbox. They had a trailer showing off the GeForce 2 GTS graphics card that they had, and it was a Marine holding up the card, and at one point he actually uses the graphics card as a flamethrower against a bunch of elites.
What?
I actually thought it was fucking hilarious.
That's awesome.
Now, we had some initial gameplay trailers for whenever it was going to be released on the Xbox. And then, we also have a trailer of, Sergeant Johnson yelling at the viewer, presenting to the player who your enemy was, even though it was only showing a grunt. And then at the end, shoots it. And then, of course, we have a really just classic, some cheesy narrator talking about fighting the Covenant and,
You got to get that blood boiling. You got to get people excited.
Dude, it was, if you go and you watch that trailer, it's so 2000. It's so early 2000.
Which is beautiful. I wouldn't have it any other way.
I still love just like little things that you could tell. Like Cortana's like haircut was very like, oh my God, which one of the developers dated this punk rock girl from the late 90s who was really into No Doubt and had some kind of tribal tramp stamp. Basically, that's the impression.
That's who the French sword became.
Pretty much.
And on that topic of beautiful French swords, another marketing tactic that they had was the Cortana Letters. And so before Halo Combat Evolved was released, a series of these oddly cryptic emails were sent to marathon.bungie.org and, had to have these deciphered, these cool emails, and they're supposedly written by Cortana. But the biggest factor of it was that the contents were greatly out of her character, which I assume it's, hey, intern, write these things. This is the character. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well,
that's one idea.
Yeah. I would love to do just a whole episode about those because they're out there. And all up until 2014, I believe, marathon.bungie.org was receiving updates. which that means we'll have to do some digging.
Oh, so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the cool things, too, was that in those emails, they also showed off her hacking skills. Like, as you see within Halo Combat Evolved, you see all that she can do. So it's kind of cool that they included that she's this kind of really badass AI that can kind of manipulate and work her way in. And so they did this with the 1.3 version of Bungie game Myth, The Fallen Lords on the CD. These messages provided a small glimpse of the Halo trilogy plot, which is huge.
Yeah, which, again, I would love to actually do an episode about this eventually and dissect, whenever she says something, be like, oh, shit, that's what she was talking about.
Like, they already knew what was going on in 3, and we just had to wait years.
Yeah, which, some of the ideas they even had for 2, like I can't wait to do the episode for Halo 2 because some of the ideas they had were pretty damn crazy. But then you see them transfer later into a book or a novel with a different character. So I'm really interested to see what actually made it and then what into the game and what made it into a book or a comic. Now that we have Halo Combat Evolved, the game, let's talk about all the basics of the game, like the enemies, the weapons, etc.
Sure.
So the Covenant is the main enemy. And they are made up of elites that look like squids. That was in my notes.
Well, your note says looks like squads, by the way. But
So yeah, we had the elites who were the top dogs. They're the big baddies. They were the commanders of any time you'd see an infantry of enemies. Typically, there was always elites there, and they were always the commanding officers. Next, we had the grunts, which are the cannon fodder. Kind of, as we were talking about earlier, the second an elite dies, all the grunts scatter. They don't know what to do. It's in their nature to just kind of be chicken shits.
well, exactly. I mean, because they're there with their fearless leader, and then once they see him die, it's like, let's get out of here.
Oh shit! Oh shit!
Yeah, and along with that, you also had the jackals. And the jackals were the ones that we talked about earlier with the elites having shields. They're the enemy that then gets this kind of circular shield. And they are loners, but also go in packs with the rest of them. Yeah,
so they're involved with it, but they're kind of in the middle. They're not the commanders, but they're not bottom of the barrel. Something interesting, there were 2 versions of the jackals. You had the ones that were black and the ones with the helmet, which, we played through this a few days prior to recording this episode. We thought, let's just get one last playthrough in and take a bunch of notes, and we both forgotten that the jackals were black. That one without the helmet.
Yeah, and they looked much more like chickens at the time, just much more bird-like, and taking on that entire kind of dinosauric structure.
Yeah, they definitely looked like they were evolving from dinosaurs to birds.
They were basically going to become tiny chickens, but they're in the combat form of chicken right now.
Yeah, and so then we had the hunters, which always came in pairs. I think they're like supposed to be 12 foot tall in the game. And those are the tanks. You don't fuck with the hunters, and they suck to fight.
Yeah, and
something interesting about the hunters, which, we're going to spoil for later on, is the hunters are actually a colony of worms. So, and I'm going to nerd out a little bit. Just one of those worms is called Letgolo. But when you have a colony of worms, it's called the Mechaletgolo. So typically, their armor is super tough, and whenever you see an opening or whatnot, it's that orange, and that's the worms that you see. Fun fact. Tell that at the next party you go to.
Interesting. And it also gives just like a nice premise to say, hey, here's a spot to shoot, like you have with every kind of like mini boss, but it's oh no, that's actually the worms. It's not like just a glowing circle for you to shoot.
Yeah, that's this kind of colony. You know, which I feel like such a fool. I didn't address all these enemies by their actual names. You have the elites who are the Zingheli. You had the grunts who are the Ungoi. You had the jackals who are the Kigyar. And then, of course, I said the hunters are the Letgolo or the Megaletgolo. Now, the next thing you fight later on are the Forerunner Sentinels, which we'll go into that later on. Basically flying machines that shoot beams at you. And then we have the Flood. Now, we see 3 versions of the Flood. We see the Infector forms, which are the little things.
Ball pods.
Yeah, I don't know what to call them. They almost look like fish without
little tentacle
flippers.
monsters.
Yeah. We have the carrier forms, which, by the way, in this game are infinitely faster than any other game. I'm pretty sure everyone was like, slow these fuckers down.
Yeah, they are your fat bulbous sacks of tiny little pods that blow up.
Yeah, they fall over, they blow up, and launch infector forms at you. And then we have the combat forms, which either come in the form of infected elites or infected humans. Now let's go on to talk about the weapons. For the UNSC, and It's so crazy seeing this list once we put it together. Like, man, there were so few, especially when I think the original third person was supposed to have like 30 weapons or something. So we have the standard assault rifle, which, how do you put it, is terrible. We have the Magnum pistol, which is an absolute unit.
Which is your sniper rifle.
We also have a sniper rifle.
Which is your pistol.
We have the rocket launcher. You also had, of course, the shotgun. No matter what, multiplayer campaign, if you got the shotgun, you're good to fucking go.
You are. If you're close enough and you can get up on someone, they're dead.
Yeah. Even if it's shoot melee.
Exactly.
That's it. That's all you need. And then we have a standard shrapnel grenade. So now let's move on to the weapons for the Covenant. Now, what you were saying earlier is, before we started this, is how Covenant weapons, they don't use ammunition like humanity does. Instead, we have, a battery that starts at 100% and it uses plasma, and eventually we just drain it down to 0.
Exactly. So it's a different tech that they've developed, which basically has these plasma burns.
That's at least for, the plasma weapons.
Exactly.
So to start out, we have the plasma rifle, which is basically a handheld assault rifle.
Exactly. So it is a continuous burst up until the battery is drained,
Or if you...
the weapon overloads.
Yeah, you can overload this, so that's what makes it a little unique. That's kind of comparable to reloading. You have to make sure it cools down. Next, we have the plasma pistol, which again is a handheld plasma weapon. And that the unique thing about this is you can overcharge it and disable an elite's shields through that. And then that's where the noob combo comes from. Delete, or, overcharge, shoot them, and then take out your pistol and shoot them in the head. So then we have the fuel rod cannon, which this is something that Grunts wield, but we cannot use it. Not until the PC version, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we have the Needler, which I love within the lore to this day. No one knows how it works, at least no one on the UNSC side. Because it's, it's this crazy pod-looking gun that has needles sticking out of the front, and then you just shoot, and they actually trace and follow you. And then once enough of them getting you, they explode. I also love the melee with it. It actually shows you taking it and hitting your enemy with the needle side, and then you put it back in your hand.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, and I like that they've kept these type of things in, because obviously it's not coming from that same development of that plasma rifle, plasma pistol. I mean, it could be a different tech from one of the species that's there. It could be a number of things, which is really nice because it allows the team at Bungie, as they developed Halo, to be like, I don't know, just pick a race, make something cool from what they know as a tech.
Exactly. So then we also have the plasma grenades, which we were talking about when we were playing it. The fuse time was just abysmal. You would throw, and then it was probably, 3 or 4 seconds?
It was long. And the one thing that I can't think at that time of any game that did this, but you had those plasma grenades would stick to you or stick to an enemy if you hit them with it.
Yeah. And that was pretty cool, which I know at least within World War II, they would use some kind of grease. So they wouldn't throw it, but you could stick it to something and run away and light the fuse.
Yeah, like that sad scene in Band of Brothers.
And then we have the energy sword, this iconic weapon from the Covenant that we couldn't even use in Combat Evolved. Anytime you'd kill an elite, it'd just go away.
They showed Chief use it, and we wouldn't get until Halo 2 to be able to be as badass as the trailer.
As Robot.
As
Master
Robot
Chief.
Robo Chief.
Yeah, Robo Chief. Now, so in the items, you had the health kit, which of course your health is getting low. Get the health kit. You also had the overshield, and then you had the cloak, which we've seen a lot of speedrunners use in order to go through. They just find every cloak in the game and then make it all the way through. Now we go on to the vehicles. And of course, we have the iconic Warthog, which I love the fact that the Warthog, 17 years later, hasn't really changed much.
No, I mean, you've made some visual improvements. You've added like a Gauss cannon. You've added other elements to the Warthog. But you still have that like iconic feel and whoopy drive of it, and just fun element of driving that around.
And then we have the Scorpion, which, spoiler alert, gets slaughtered design-wise in Halo 5. Of course, the Scorpion, had just the big tank that could seat 4 people. It also had a machine gun on it, as well as just the initial cannon on the front. We as well have the Ghost, again, something all up until about Halo 5 doesn't really, have any kind of change to it. But then, after this game, we do get boost on top of it. So Halo 2 and up, we get the boost on the Ghost. And this thing was actually kind of hard to drive in Halo Combat Evolved. Kind of swish everywhere.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you're dealing with a vehicle that didn't have wheels, but you still had to kind of figure out how to drive it on like that hover for them.
And give it some kind of, like the developers had to give it some kind of physics,
Exactly. So it did have that kind of draft feel where like you didn't get immediate stop. You kind of just went with it a bit, which was kind of cool if you're trying to cheese the game a bit and get some vehicles where they're not supposed to go.
Yeah. And then, of course, another iconic thing we have is the Banshee, the aerial Covenant vehicle. We have then the Wraith tank, which is non-drivable. We also have Pelicans, again, non-drivable. We have Spirit dropships that are kind of the tuning forks, non-drivable. Never have been drivable, actually. And then we have the drop pods. We see them around, when we land in the cutscenes, but again, something we can't really operate. Of course, I have to mention the UNSC Pillar of Autumn, the big vehicle.
Of course.
Yeah.
Truth and reconciliation.
That too. All right. So now that we've basically been leading up to how this game was made, we're finally to the campaign. One of the most arguably iconic campaigns of all time and one of the most iconic game series of all time.
Totally agree. I will say now for the audience, I'm not a fan.
We'll talk about them more. We'll talk about them more.
But as we talk more, and if I have a little negative connotation, we'll talk about that near the end.
Yeah.
But that'll kind of explain why I have it as we're talking through.
As I said, what was it? Thursday? It's a Monday right now. Thursday, we sat down together and you played the campaign and I basically took all these notes.
Yep.
So I got to hear and see Alex get very frustrated.
I did one of the world's worst speed runs.
Now, we start with the Pillar of Autumn, and the description for this is escape intact as the Covenant forces board your ship. I like how you describe this. The campaign starts with you see the Pillar of Autumn, and you said it's a very Star Wars-esque intro, seeing that ship,
It is. You kind of have the ship crawling across screen, which is one of the first things that you see in the original Star Wars.
Yeah.
And it's just this, you see this massive ship and there's kind of a little space stuff. It's just...
And unique design, too.
It is. And it is. And I thought that was just really neat to start it out that way to get people super interested that you're on
like,
this...
what?
Yeah.
And then it even zooms in straight into the control center, and you see how big the ship is because of how small that control center is. And, we have the iconic line, Cortana, all I need to know is, did we lose them? And she says, I think we both know the answer to that, which is a reference, to the Fall of Reach book. They're fleeing Reach because Reach just fell. So the Covenant beat them to this area, which is they find this ring world, and we meet Captain Jacob Keyes and we meet Cortana. And at this point, Keyes says, wake up the Master Chief. She says, already on it. So this is now where we first meet Master Chief, and we go through that part that you were complaining about a lot, which was the joystick test. You know, you have to make sure you like it, or if you ever want to invert it. Which I love that you were just like, who the fuck would ever invert this?
I'm not flying a plane. I don't need inverted shooting controls.
So at that part. And this is something I love, is that, once you get all your control set, that's when the Covenant board the ship and they start to attack. And at first, we don't really see them. We're kind of just seeing these silhouettes, behind this smoke of them, starting to kill people. And you have to make your way to the bridge. And you don't have a weapon. You're just seeing all these Marines around you killing these Covenant. And you have to just kind of make it through, and you're just like, shit. So, you get to the bridge, and Key says he's going to land, the Autumn's going down, so he's going to land it manually on the ring. Everyone else needs to get off. And so by that point, he gives you the pistol, the iconic Magnum, which is actually, I never thought about it, the first weapon we get to experience.
So basically, Keyes saves everybody.
Pretty much. So then we go through and we start fighting off the Covenant. And by the very end, we find ourselves at a drop pod. You get a Marine inside of it, and then you leave the Pillar of Autumn. Now, this is where we find ourselves on mission number 2, Halo. And it says, seek out surviving Marines and help them fight the Covenant. And so, of course, you start out, you crash land on Halo, and everyone else dies.
That's in your pod.
Yeah. There are survivors.
The game ends there. So you crash land on Halo, and as we kind of said before, Halo is known as that open world style shooter. Now, you were a little bit on the rails when you're in the Pillar of Autumn, kind of going through the ship, getting your controls.
Not a lot of freedom.
Not a lot of freedom. You still had some open spaces and still had routes you could choose. But this is really where it starts. And you look out and you're on this ring world, and you can look up and see the rest of the ring, and you look around you and see a waterfall and greenery and this just beautiful lush landscape that you didn't have in these kind of grueling, grisly shooters of modern day with Call of Duty, going to World War II stuff, and with any other like shooter that you had, it was always this kind of very compartmentalized effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at this point, I think this is where we first see the Banshees. We see first see a Spirit and a Banshees, because a Spirit comes in and it drops off enemy forces, and you have Banshees start shooting at you, and you make your way towards the hills. And at this point is when we find a Forerunner structure, and there's some Marines holding out there. So we have to, of course, defend the Marines. And basically, throughout this mission, it's kind of wash, rinse, repeat. You find Marines held off in an area. You help defend them, and then Foehammer, iconic character, comes in, picks them up, gets them out of there.
Yeah, so she comes in with her Pelican, picks them up, and she's the one who helps deliver supplies. So she comes in, drops off a Warthog, and you kind of go around to, like Jesse said, each part, and wash, rinse, repeat. But it does allow you to choose which section of Marines you're going to save first.
Yeah. But of course, after that first time, there is a part where you do go into this Forerunner almost cave into this underground section, which where Cortana makes her famous. This cave is not a natural formation, which we have a little fun trivia about here in a minute. But I love this scene where you go into this almost underground section, and you make your way up to a control panel, and then you see this little cutscene, very cinematic, of the first time we see like this light bridge. And so we're starting to see this technology from that isn't Covenant, that we don't know what it is, but they have like light bridge technology to make kind of amazing things like that. And another thing that you start to notice is that when you're in the Warthog, I like about this is the only game that shows the passenger's health, which I thought was really interesting. I guess I just by Halo 2, they're like, nah, fuck that. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you know.
Yeah, it's crazy because you have your side passenger and then your gunner, and you just see as that health goes down. And I think that they put that in there to kind of be the same as like Chief has health, your Marines have health, so you track those things.
Yeah.
And then once Halo 2 hit and you lost your health bar and you got that Call of Duty Battlefield thing where your shields go down,
and then you really don't know how much time.
You can
until you die.
Until you die. So yeah, having that in there was really interesting, and it allowed I guess some tracking of your people if you cared.
Yeah. Well, if you have a gunner, then it helps a lot.
Yeah.
But, after you save everyone, then Cortana finds out that Keyes is being held hostage on the Truth and Reconciliation. This ship that she had disabled before they had left the Autumn. So the mission ends, you board the Pelican, and you're off. Now, again, we made that kind of, we said we'd have some trivia about Cortana's line. Now, originally, the cave that which Cortana refers to as that, didn't look like a natural formation. Apparently, this was going to be a cave at first that eventually slowly works its way into this like kind of man-made cave, and thus they changed it later on, but they kept her line. So a lot of people don't know that context, and that's why a lot of people kind of make fun of that line within the game. Now we have Mission 3, the Truth and Reconciliation. I liked the first half of this. I didn't like the second half once we actually board the ship.
Sure.
The description is board a Covenant ship in an attempt to rescue Captain Keyes. I like how they said in an attempt, because it always makes it like, oh shit, are we going to find him dead?
Yeah,
I did like that.
Are we going to get captured? Or so it doesn't give you like the point, like go pick him up. Just go help him out of here real quick.
The mission starts at night, and you make your way to the ship. And this is the first time we have the sniper rifle.
Yep.
With a shitload of ammo.
Yeah, that's one big thing too about this game was they're like, yeah, just give him a fuckload of ammo for everything.
For everything.
Have the shotgun, have 24 shots, like just have way too much for everybody.
Exactly. So it kind of starts as a stealth mission until you fire the first shot, and then everyone knows you're there.
Yeah.
So you fight through a few waves of Covenant, and you make your way to the gravity lift, and you have to fight off more Covenant there. This is where we first see the Hunters. They come down, you have to fight them off. Once you kill them, you make your way up the ship. And I actually love the scene and the music, where everyone else comes up. And it also shows like kind of the size of Master Chief because it takes him like a few seconds before it can pick him up because in the lore he's, I want to say like 1,200 pounds or something, 12 or 1,300 pounds.
Something like that.
Because the armor alone is half a ton.
Yeah, and it's really cool too. I like that scene because you kind of see this crazy wonderment in like the Marines' faces themselves. Like, whoa, like we're actually getting like this lift up to this ship. Like it's really crazy.
Cool. Yeah. And so now we're inside the ship. And in the background, there's a lot of firsts for this mission. We first see a Wraith, but it's not being driven.
No, it's just there as utility.
Yeah. So then we fight off Covenant waves and we make our way and we find Keyes and some other prisoners locked up. And so we kill the elites guarding them, and we unlock them. So at this point, Keyes talks about how he had heard the Covenant calling this ring world Halo. And he says, quote, whoever controls Halo controls the fate of the universe. So now they know, okay, Halo is a weapon, which I like the fact that apparently there was going to be a whole mission around just finding out what Halo is.
Sure.
But it got cut. So, of course, they had to then just say, okay, well, let's just add this really kind of out of place long dialogue, I guess.
Which to me, I suppose is fine. If you can't put it in, I'd rather have kind of this dialogue that somehow Keyes is like, yeah, so I just overheard them just talking right in front of me about this entire thing, and let me give you the entire plot point of this.
Let me give you the plot of the game.
Yeah, let me give you the entire plot. Oh, Cortana also knows about it. That's really cool. Cool. But I'd rather have that than the developers just go, fuck it, just go to the next mission, and they'll figure it out themselves.
Yeah, and so you also find out that the Covenant are looking for the control room. So you all escape, you make your way out, and then we get the very ending, you find a spirit drop ship, and Key says, fuck it, I'm going to drive this. Yeah. And this is where we see that really badass scene of two hunters come out. The spirit looks like a tuning fork. So he just takes the two sides of the ship and just crushes these two hunters and then just makes his way out.
Just flies out. Just as badass the captain as he is.
He is. Once we start talking about Halo, the Fall of Reach, you will really come to love this character anymore. Granted, I don't know how many people read that book prior to this game, but it made me like really feel for loving this captain even more after I read The Fall of Reach. I was like, God damn, he's cool, but he's even cooler in the book.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that more with our next episodes coming out as we follow that along. But yeah, I mean, I always wanted to play the game first, then read the book, and then take that knowledge I already had and be like, wow. Everyone's really badass in this.
Yeah, which I know that there are a few books, like say like Bad Blood, that are going to give you some context post Halo 5 going into Halo 6. So it's like we're probably going to make sure we get on those and read those before Infinite comes out.
Exactly.
I called it 6. How foolish of me. It's Infinite.
Close enough. It has an eye in it.
So now we go into the fourth mission, the Silent Cartographer. And the description is as follows. Search for the map room that will lead you to the secrets of Halo. Which I think, honestly, I love just like that kind of quote, the secrets of Halo. Because it kind of is, the whole premise of the game. We get dropped off at a beach. And this is the first almost kind of like battle. I like, it's like we're running up and just attacking them.
Yeah, it's the first kind of like hot drop where it's just like, all right, get in there. You're going to land on this beach. You're going to see like and once again, my favorite thing, I think that I really liked was just the lush environment they built for Halo. The diversity in it. It wasn't just singular being on Halo the entire time. Like you just didn't have to fight in these forests or in the beaches or things like that. You're on Covenant ships, you're in Forerunner tech. You've got all these things. So like the diversity of change in missions definitely keeps you in the game.
Yeah, so that's something they did very, very well. After you fight off these Covenant initially, Echo 419 drops off a Warthog for you, and you go and you explore this. You're on like an island.
Yeah.
You explore this island some more, which is basically just like where you can travel as a ring. And in the middle are like these little areas like you can go into. Cortana, later on, you make your way to inside of this structure, and you go to try to find yourself inside of the control room, but you get locked out by the Covenant. At this point, Cortana explains that they actually have a very good understanding of the rings, how the ring works, and using the ring's technology itself, which is Forerunner tech. Fun fact.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you an idea that so they've known about a lot more of this than we have. Like we're kind of just discovering a lot of this going along, but they've been working with this for a while.
And you learn, spoiler alert, the Covenant have been handling Forerunner technology for years and years.
And it's definitely helped, with their advances and everything they have going on, and it's become their own holy relic.
Yeah, and so you then make your way into a different structure. this is where you kind of learn there's a lot of wash, rinse, repeat cycles within this campaign.
Oh, yeah.
You make your way into a different structure, then you unlock the door to this other structure. I find it odd that the unlock button from the outside is just on the other side of this island.
You know how you have to do it.
Yeah. And so then you make your way back to the other structure, you fight your way through, and then you eventually find yourself to the map room. Looking at this map, you can now find where the control room is. Because it's a lot of, I need to find this room, to find this room, to find this, to bring it back to this. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Which as it is, though, is really interesting to see that, like, you have to go to these different spots. Like, the Forerunners knew it's not just like, oh, push this button to activate Halo. It's here is the map of the whole ring to see what the structure is, where you have to go.
Yeah.
And then eventually get to the control room, which can control Halo's abilities.
Yeah. And so then once you find the location of the control room, you dip set. You get in to a Pelican with Echo 419, and then she takes you underground. And that's the end of this mission.
Which is awesome.
Now, some fun trivia. Bungie has stated that, this mission was actually originally just a sandbox where they would just test a lot of things, like lighting, graphics, weapons, and vehicles. They never really intended it for, to be a mission, but it's later become one of the more memorable missions of the game. The original objective of this mission was to assassinate a Covenant prophet who was trying to find the silent Cartographer. But then eventually we reused this in Halo 2.
And then our next mission is Assault on the Control Room. And
the funnest mission.
Oh, it's some top quality right there. So you defend the control room against wave after wave after wave after wave after wave of Covenant troops.
That basically is the mission. We can move on.
Yeah. No. So it starts where you left off in the last one. You were on the island. You discovered that there's this little opening, not little, but opening that you can go into. That
you can fit a giant.
You can fit a big ass Pelican
in there.
Yeah. So Foehammer drops you down into a bunker down there, and so you scare off this grunt, and then it starts fighting. A whole little fleet of Covenant come out. You start off the battle,
and then you make your way outside.
Exactly, and this is the first time that we see that we're outside, and there's snow. It's almost a snowy biome.
Yeah.
And Cortana notes that it seems artificial, and kind of wonders why, or is it malfunctioning? Is this what it's meant to do? Are they trying to hide something here?
Yeah, and I mean, there's explanations in the lore, but you never get it within this game or the missions as to why the weather is like it is. Now, at this point, you get a message from Marines that, hey, please save us. So, of course, like you've been doing throughout this game, you go and save some Marines as often as you should. So afterwards, you have to travel through a lot of maze-like structures. You find yourself in these rooms that have corridors, and they're kind of confusing, as we noted as we were playing through. They can be confusing, especially for a first-time player.
Yeah, it's a lot of repeated structures. So you basically have this kind of center room that you would go into with an outside corridor, I guess is the best way to describe it, that can kind of go around the outside of it with one side blocked off. So it's almost a full circle with a wall blocking a part of it. So you make your way through all of these, make several different trips kind of going through to make your way to the control room.
Yeah. And so eventually you find yourself outside, and this is the first time that we see ghosts and that Wraith tank being used, which Wraiths are kind of shitty in this game.
Yeah, they're... Well, if you get hit with them, they're not that shitty.
True. It's just like, I don't know. You see them operate super goofy. I don't know. I wasn't necessarily a fan, but then of course, you can use a ghost in this mission. But later on, you find a scorpion. First time we get to use that scorpion and just dominate everyone, including some hunters. That's the funnest part, seeing hunters and being like, not today.
Yeah, and this mission, like we said, it is the longest one that is in Halo Combat Evolved, and there's various elements of the same hallway that you run through, the same thing you got to do, but there's different structures and different objectives as you go through them. So with this, you're taking the tank and going through different Forerunner hallways, I guess is the best way to describe it, different underground structures they built.
And you're finding yourself going up places to go literally back down, and kind of a lot of running around. Those probably unnecessary, but literally nothing. What are you going to do now?
I guess the best way to put it is this is where Bungie really flexed on everything that they could do in this one map. You've got Banshees, you've got Ghosts, you've got the Scorpion War. I mean, you've got every vehicle.
I'd say this was kind of like the sandbox.
This was the sandbox mission that you're playing, because you're testing out all the different Covenant that you can kind of work with, all the different vehicles and structures that you can build, and just testing out these really different objectives.
So finally, you find the control center. And you put Cortana in the control center, and she's freaking out because there's just a wealth of knowledge that she's experiencing. Chief instantly is like, all right, how do we use Halo as a weapon? Which is always frustrating that, Cortana's upset that she's like, well, it's not that simple. She doesn't really explain a lot because then shortly afterwards, all of a sudden, she's like, oh my God, Captain Keyes is trying to find this weapons cache, and now all of a sudden the Covenant have uncovered something, and she's like, what? She's like, doesn't matter, go, go, go. So she just sends you to fight what you find out later is the Flood.
Yeah, so it's her fault.
But doesn't tell you.
Yes.
She's not like, hey, just an FYI, here are some, at the time, all we knew of, just space zombies. She's just like, hey, just go.
Yeah.
And just kind of just sends you off. And so that's the end of the mission. Now, we go on to the next mission, 343 Guilty Spark. The description is creep through a swamp and meet the only enemy that the Covenant fear. Which this one is where we kind of get that unintentional horror aspect. This, there are parts of Halo that you can treat as a horror game, and this is one of them. So, Echo 419 drops you off in a mysterious swamp, and that's where Keyes was last known to have been. So as you're making it through, you see these explosions happening, and the Covenant are falling down off of hills and whatnot. And as you make your way to the entrance of a structure, you can see that the Covenant are fighting something, but you can't see what it is because by the time you make your way there, it's gone. And so you take the elevator to a lower level where you find more Covenant. But then once you work your way through these hallways, you're finding dead Covenant bodies and blood just covering the walls. And again, it's starting to find this more and more horror aspect. So then you eventually find this Marine who's scared as shit to see you. And you either have to leave him alone or he just keeps shooting at you until he kills you. So of course this is one of the few times, if not the only time, it's like shoot this Marine. And you're not getting flagged for it.
It is, but it definitely draws up that moral implication of what are you doing?
Because you can't just as easily leave him alone, or you can cap him. So then you find yourself at this room, and once you open the door, a dead Marine falls on you. And this is where you're just like, oh my God, what the fuck is happening? So you find a helmet of Private Wallace Jenkins, which is a character we will know and love later on, and you watch the footage. So you see Johnson, Keyes, Wallace Jenkins, and some other Marines. They make their way into this structure. And they're noting as well that, these Covenant bodies are looking very weird and how they die. It just doesn't make sense. I also love just the fun fact that Johnson's listening to metal and that the Marines just don't like it. So if anyone's curious, Johnson's a metalhead.
Yeah.
And so eventually they find themselves in this room, and they're kind of confused because they have yet to find weapons. And this is where we see the infector forms come in and start attacking everyone. And then that ends. At this point, you can never see Chief's face, but by his actions, you can tell he's kind of nervous now. He's kind of scared. He's like, oh my God, what were these things I just saw? And this is where then all of a sudden, I think over 100 by the end of it, you have to fight off about 100 infector forms in this little room.
Yeah,
they just all start barging in.
Yeah, because in the video you see that they're coming in through these doors, breaking down doors, and then as soon as the video ends, the door in front of you bursts open and infector forms file in.
Yeah, and then finally the final door opens, and we also meet the combat forms. We see elites infected, and we see oh my God, you see their heads hanging off the side and the iconic the flood antennas coming out of the face. So you have to make your way now out of this structure, and you have to fight through hordes of flood, and finally, you run into some Marines at the very end. You take the elevator back up, and you have to fight your way out of the swamp. As you're doing this, you're hearing this ominous laughing, and then all of a sudden, we meet 343 Guilty Spark, which describe them basically just a metal soccer ball with a blue light.
Exactly. It's this little floating robot that's got this kind of blue light as, I guess, an eye, if you wanted to say it the best way. That's just kind of this, like you said, odd laughing that you would experience in kind of any horror film.
Yeah.
That's just very non-caring.
Yeah. And so you meet him. He says, I'm the monitor of installation 4, and it's my job to make sure that the Flood don't leave this ring. And then he transports you away. And at that point, Echo 419 is like, yo, where the fuck did you just go? So now we have an infamous level, the library. Fight your way through an ancient security facility in the search of the index. This level is definitely wash, rinse, repeat.
Yep.
basically, it's just lots of turns of just going through. You get teleported into this facility, and Spark informs you must find the index. The index activates the Halo ring and will kill all the Flood. So this is the first mission where we meet the carrier forms, as we talked about before, and they're very annoying. Basically, this whole mission is very hard, very annoying, lots of Flood.
Especially if you're not Jesse and you actually played on Legendary.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those ones where we played it through pretty easily. We put it the other night because we just threw it on just to get through it, and it's pretty simple if you're doing that.
Yeah.
But if you're actually getting through, like, you definitely do get that kind of element of suspense when Guilty Spark's like, oh, hold on, I gotta open this door. And then just leaves you there to have to kind of fight wave after wave. And it can be tough. It's a tough one.
Yeah, and so you're making your way through this library to find the index. And we could go on about every turn and everything you have to do, but it's a pretty straightforward thing. You keep going through the library. Eventually you have to stop while Spark's getting ready to open this door. You fight off Covenant, and then you go through. In this level, we do see the Sentinels for the first time. They're fighting with you. They're fighting against the Flood. They're helping out a lot. The one thing that's frustrating is that they will hit you sometimes a lot. There's a lot of friendly fire.
Yes.
Playing through this, sometimes like the Sentinels will kill you, or they'll drain your shields, and then you'll die instantly once something touches you.
Oh, exactly, because they're trying to shoot one of the Flood on you, and then they hit you, and then you're immediately killed by a Flood.
Yeah. So you eventually find the index, and the second you take it, Spark takes it from you, says, hey, you're organic, you can't have this. So then you guys transport back to the control room. This is where we start the next mission, two betrayals. It's described as such. Reactivate the weapon at the heart of Halo and learn the truth. So at this point, you're taken back to the control room. Spark says to Chief, you can only activate Halo. I cannot. So as you try to do that, Cortana zaps Spark, which she says that she had been waiting for 12 hours, apparently. You play this mission in 40 minutes, so you're like, apparently all this time it was like 12 hours of Chief doing this. So it gives you context of like he, had to spend a lot of time fighting the Flood. So he's probably tired and cranky at this point.
Yes, that is exactly what I took away from it.
Yeah. And she then informs Chief, listen, this doesn't kill the Flood. This kills the food, which is all of us. Halo rings destroy central nervous systems. And thus, they starve to death. And, Chief says, well, is this true? And Spark says, yeah. Basically, he's just very nonchalant about it. He's like, yeah, of course. This is where we go into the famous line. He said, you already knew that. I mean, how couldn't you? And later says, the last time you asked me if it were my choice, would I do it? And he says, yeah, which is something that we'll talk about. Man, we probably won't reference that line again for another year on this show at least, because, it's never addressed in the lore for about another, for 10 years afterwards or so. Not 10, but yeah, about 10 years later. We don't find out anything about why Spark said that and having these odd memories with Chief, We'll find out. You find out about 10 years later in the lore, which we will talk about then. Kind of rule for this podcast, we're not going to jump into, well, what he meant by this and give you a 20-minute explanation from a book that we're going to cover eventually. Instead, we'll cover that book and come back to this reference.
Exactly.
So at this point, Spark says, all right, well, give me your construct or give me your AI. He says, no. So he says, all right, he tells the Sentinels, keep his head and kill him. So now at this point, you have to fight the Sentinels now, make your way out of the control room. At this point, Cortana is saying, okay, listen, we need to destroy Halo. I can use a Pillar of Autumn's fusion reactors to destroy the Flood and Halo. So you have to go then and destroy the pulse generators in Halo to distract 343 Guilty Spark and buy yourself some time. So that's what you work on then. You have to destroy 3 total, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
3 total. And this is also one of the first of the last few missions where it's an entirely backtracking mission. So you're basically going back and doing assault on the control room, but in reverse.
Yeah, so you're seeing levels that you had just seen a mission or 2 missions prior, a mission prior.
Exactly. And so you're going back through to some of these same rooms that you've gone. You're able to pilot the Banshee, fly through different areas, and go into some of those corridors we talked about before, where you have a central system with a corridor around it, and you basically use your shield as this big pulse to overload it.
I loved playing this. That if you have to, if you are an inch above where you should jump out of a Banshee, you die. Which it's like either 2 foot from the ground. If it's 25 inches and not 24, you die.
Yeah, that was definitely.
You learned that the hard way. I think that killed you the most.
That definitely did. That ruined the perfect world record speedrun we were on. But yeah, so you basically go through 3 different modules. One that has Covenant, one that has the Sentinels, and one that has flood that you have to deal with as you're going through to do these. So you have kind of cool, they put it in there that you have to deal with 3 kind of different elements.
Yeah.
As you go and drain your shield, which is a huge thing, especially against the flood, that if you're pretty much hit once, you're dead.
Yeah. And so by the end of that, Cortana says, hey, I found out that we have to go save Keyes. He's back on the Truth and Reconciliation. So she figures out a way to transport Chief to the Truth and Reconciliation. Now, this is where we start out with mission number 9, which is Keyes. It is described as such. Stage a 1 cyborg assault on a Covenant ship and bring back the captain. 1 cyborg. Is that you?
Yeah.
1 cyborg, I guess. You're not really a cyborg, though. You kind of are.
I mean, for the most part, before any lore was really built up, you're basically a giant machine.
Okay. So, yeah.
With a dude slightly piloting it.
Yeah. So the mission starts, you see the Flood and the Covenant fighting. So you're seeing like, oh my God, they're spreading pretty damn quickly. And as you're transported into the ship, you land upside down. I liked how I put in the note, Chief slaps his helmet as a fuck off to Cortana.
Yeah, this is when they both start getting really cheeky with each other, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I like that. You hear Keyes over the comm, telling him to leave him behind, like get off this ship, get the hell out of here. Which I like that you found interesting. You're like, shouldn't they actually, they're risking their own lives and they're the only people that can save humanity. Like, why are they here?
Exactly, and he's disobeying a direct order.
Yeah, which Keyes mentions many times. Like, this is a direct order. Leave.
Exactly, like. Go and do the plan that you and Cortana have to overload the engine and destroy Halo.
Yeah.
It's a giant loss of life, but it is minuscule compared to what Halo would do.
Yeah, which is, again, a reason why you should like Keyes, because he's like, nah, I'm good. As you have to, you eventually, you're making your way through the ship, and you have to get out of the ship, and you fall in this giant puddle of green ooze.
Yeah, so it's kind of where it landed. So this mission's part going back to the Truth and Reconciliation, which you did in the mission, Truth and Reconciliation, and then with a couple other elements that were kind of, I liked, because it's basically you started at the end of the level of Truth and Reconciliation.
Yeah.
And then you started back on the ground where you started the previous Truth and Reconciliation mission. And then you eventually make your way fighting through the Flood and Covenant and like this goopy water, I guess, if that's the best way to put that.
Yeah.
And then you make your way back onto the ship.
Yeah, and then again, kind of, you're going through these corridors you already know.
Because you're basically playing the same thing. You get to the exact same grav lift.
Yeah, and so eventually, after fighting through hordes of Covenant, you find Keyes. And before I even say this, you keep hearing him on the comm saying, leave, do not come for me. I think if he was already still human, he would have said that, but you find out why. You walk into this control center and you see that Keyes has become part of the Flood. He's part of this giant mound. Cortana says the line, the captain, he's one of them. At this point, then you have to get the chip out of Keyes' head. So you have to punch through it and hear just the sound of bones breaking, and you pull it out. Now, you needed Keyes' chip in order for his authorization code to override the Pillar of Autumn's fusion reactors. So then now you escape the Truth and Reconciliation on a Banshee, and you make your way to the Pillar of Autumn. Now we have the final mission, the Maw. Destroy Halo before Halo destroys all life in the galaxy. And it starts out, this Banshee that they're on is malfunctioning, and Chief crash lands it into the side. But I actually like that how you said, when this mission, the Maw, starts out, it's showing kind of the Pillar of Autumn, and you said it's kind of ending how it started. This cinematic scene of the Pillar of Autumn seeing its true size.
Exactly, and crash landed, and it's a juxtapose to it flying in space and all those other things, but it's also juxtaposed to the first mission.
Yeah.
Because you are now back in the Pillar of Autumn and going through this desolate, destroyed, fire-ridden ship.
Yeah.
Like flooded with... Well, there you go, flooded with flood.
Yeah.
As one would say. But flood are just everywhere going through this ship, and they're fighting Sentinels who've come to kind of deal with it, and you're trying to make your way to get this fusion reactor to overload the engine, basically.
Yeah, so a lot of the mission, you make your way to the control center fighting off Flood and Sentinels. Once you upload Cortana into the control center, you can hear Spark over the comm. And he's in the Pillar of Autumn, and he's very excited because he's learning about, he's been stuck on this Halo ring. So now he has tens of thousands of years of history that he's learning about. He's like, why the hell would you destroy this? We have so much history. Which it's odd, that's where kind of his mind goes versus universe, what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I guess it boils down to because he's in the lowest sense of the word a librarian.
Yeah.
And he is the keeper of information and keeper of this halo. So for him to be like, oh shit, there's more stuff out there that you guys like that I'm learning now. Why would you destroy this information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is the reason I like Spark, because he's a very odd character on what his priorities are. Mm-hmm. And, we learn more and more about him as time goes on.
Yeah.
So something we actually noticed, I think originally in the keys level, but then we noticed in the Maw, is that black elites or the spec op elites start popping up, and you don't see them anywhere prior in the game.
Oh, I honestly kind of forgot about that and did notice that because it's in like the last two missions that you're really seeing that happen.
Yeah, and so why we were in the control room is we initiated the override to overload these fusion reactors, but then that's when Spark came in and stopped it. So now we have to manually go do it, and that's where Chief says, "Can I just use a grenade?" And he has that softball-sized grenade that he's like showing off. So then, we go and we throw grenades, or Cortana says you can use a rocket launcher, and we we destroy these 4 fusion reactors. So now we got to get out of there. So we make our way through Covenant and Flood, and Echo 419 is going to come and get us.
So we're in Warthog at this point.
Yeah, we get in the Warthog, and we make our way there. As we're waiting, Banshees shoot down Echo 419, and we lose a very iconic character.
So Foehammer goes down with it, and this was our exit strategy.
Yeah, Captain goes down with the ship.
Exactly, and so we lose this really cool iconic character, and you kind of like, we got to keep going. And so
you just have to go.
What you thought was the end of the mission, it's like, nope, you've got a bit more to go.
Now we know, there's this longsword at the end of this tunnel. We got to go make our way to this longsword. And at this point that the Autumn is getting ready to get destroyed, you have a timer. You make your way through all these Flood and these Covenant. You find yourself at the longsword, and you run in at the last second, and you make it. You get the hell out of there, and behind you, you see Halo. The Autumn blows up, and Halo bits of it are blowing off and destroying other bits of it. And so one of the last scenes of the game, we see Chief and Cortana in this longsword. Cortana says, "Halo, it's finished." And Chief says, "No, I think we're just getting started." So
a great little fun line to say, hey, let's keep on this adventure.
Yeah, if this game sells well.
Yeah, but it is really cool. I mean, we didn't really talk too much about this, but just the badass one-liners that Chief has.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, and just to kind of get these little quips in, like he didn't have a lot of lines throughout the entire series of it. But with this, like you get these little insights, especially a lot of it building Cortana and Chief's relationship.
Yeah, and it ends with the camera pans out, and right as you can't see Chief in his helmet, you see him take off the helmet. But people hacked into the game, and you find out they never rendered a face for Chief. He's just taking a helmet off of his helmet. And then we have to touch on the legendary ending, which every good Halo game has. Now, this legendary ending is not canon. It was just a fun little thing to put in there. We see Johnson fighting a stealth elite, and they're fighting over an assault rifle. And they look up and they see the Pillar of Autumn start to explode. And so Johnson says, I think, what does he say? "Bring it in, baby, hold me." And they hug and they embrace their doom. Again, not canon, but always a fun little thing that to watch, And it was just Halo having that comical side, as serious and emotion evoking as it can be. It can also just be goofy and fun.
It does. It hits on all sides. And what I really love, I remember my initial feeling with when I was a kid when I played this game. You get to the end, Chief takes his helmet off, and that's when you first discover that this kind of could be a human with this. It's not like, because they say the one cyborg assault, they kind of reference all these machine things and don't reference your humanity, really?
Which is something is slowly explored upon throughout the series. Unless, of course, you've read the book prior to playing this game, but not a lot of people did.
Exactly. So I thought that was such a neat ending, that 2 reasons to leave the audience wanting more. 1, the fight's not over yet, but 2, we're getting interested in these characters now.
Absolutely.
Like, we now see that he has this kind of personal side and like takes his helmet off. He's taking a break.
Yeah. And so now, and something I always want to do after we go through a campaign walkthrough is I always want to talk about the music, because I think the music is such an important part in every Halo game. So, Halo's soundtrack was created by Bungie Studios audio director Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. The soundtrack received a large amount of praise from many critics. The official soundtrack was released June 11th, 2002 under the Something Else Music Works label. The soundtrack contains 27 songs, including the opening suite, The Truth and Reconciliation, On a Pale Horse, Dust and Echoes, and Halo. Now, when Martin began writing the music, he asked what the tone of this game was and what the tone of the music should be. And he was told it needs to be something ancient, epic, and mysterious. While he was driving to Mike's house to get ready to record this, he created the melody in about a half hour, the iconic, oh, and, you know...
That was abysmal. We're going to go ahead and dub that over for you guys, so you guys are going to listen to that.
And so, you know, if this is known as Gregorian chants, which I also like the fact that he uses different elements, because later on he puts in Arabic chants, otherwise known as Qawwali, which is, you know, anytime you hear that female singing in those tracks, that's what this is. Now, something also unique about Halo is he didn't want the music to just be static. He didn't want something that was always playing. He made sure he would sit with the developers and ask them, what do you think the player should feel? And they'd say they should feel scared. So he'd say, okay, at this point, once they cross this line, that's when the scary music comes on. Or, you know, at this point when the player should feel, you know, jazzed and pumped up, then that's when this song's going to come in and really just make them want to fight more.
Oh, yeah. And we really noted that when we did our playthrough.
Yeah.
Of, like, especially one when, like, Chief's going down to discover the room where he first discovers the flood. And it's like this creepy kind of music sets right in for you.
Yeah. And it's something I've always loved is that he's really invested in how the player feels through music. And he's created these iconic sounds that we all know. Now, something else that was kind of interesting is some of them came with a bonus DVD. This bonus DVD came with 4 things that you could view or listen to. The first official Halo 2 trailer, a concept demo at Mombasa on Earth featuring Master Chief, Johnson, Marines, alongside with Cortana's voice being heard on the demo. The third option is the music from the trailer, and the fourth option is the music from the demo. Now, there's a piece of music that is heard on the level Assault on the Control Room, but isn't on the soundtrack itself. If you do some digging into halo.bungie.net, you'll be able to find a list of unused and unnamed tracks that were originally made for Combat Evolved. The track has officially, or more or less unofficially, been named the Lost Song by fans. Some of these other tracks that were never used actually have a lot of similarities and to some stuff in Reach, and I think even one song eventually does get reused for Halo Reach, which once our episode about Reach comes out, we'll talk about the similarities between both Halo Combat Evolved and Reach.
So yeah, so as we wrap, like we've given you kind of the start to end as far as the campaign and Halo as a game has come about. So we want to go through like some general reactions of, I mean, how it was received when it first came out. I mean, Halo was the main launch title for the Xbox, and I agree with this entirely, but it is said to be the game that made the Xbox what it is today.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's widely renowned for saving the Xbox and really putting that console on the map. I mean, you're already competing with Nintendo and Sony and just other companies at the time that could have just crushed it. It could have just been like, look at that flop. Come to us. We've got some really cool exclusives. Let's do that.
Now, but it's crazy that it wasn't like an initial like overnight success, but over the course of 2 years that it was released, it stayed on the top 10 chart. It never fell off. So it was like its popularity took a minute, but not that long.
No.
But it was still, you know, granted, they said that I think about 25% of people who owned an Xbox also owned Combat Evolved. It's one of the highest rated games ever. You know, IGN gave it a 9.7 out of 10. XPlay gave it a perfect 5 out of 5, and it got Game of the Year from IGN, EGM, OXM, and AIAS. Overall, it was such a cultural phenomenon that, you know, eventually led us to this culture that we have now and this podcast. It was regarded as such a damn good game, and it was different for its time. The general reaction, you know, it's everyone's kind of been loving this game. Now, there are different versions of Combat Evolved. Now, we have first, Halo PC. Halo PC is a computer port for the Halo Combat Evolved for both PC and the Mac. Though this version does not have multiplayer or campaign split screen capabilities, this version featured 6 new multiplayer maps. Cut weapons like the Flamethrower and the Fuel Rod Cannon that are both usable, and cut drivable vehicles. Then we have the Japanese cover, which I love this cover. I would love to try to get a version of this for the studio.
Sure.
We also have Game of the Year version, Platinum Hits, and then Platinum Hits Best of, in case anyone's curious about how many times I guess we can resell this game and people are still going to buy it.
Yeah, as a marketing ploy, you're like, I know you've played it, but have you played it? But also, have you played it?
Have you played it? Have you played the best of?
Yeah.
Have you played the best of? And the Platinum Hits best of. Now, we have the Halo Triple Pack, which is Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, and the Halo 2 multiplayer disc. Again, something I want for the studio. I don't want to drop $70 for this. I have seen, though, the box float around. And there's nothing different about those 3 games that go inside of it. I'm tempted, but nah, I think we got to stay true to it. Yeah. And then we had a Japanese only release, which is Halo History Pack, which was Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, and a sneak peek at Halo 3. And of course, there is the original version that is available on the anniversary version that was released originally on the Xbox 360, along with it being released on the Master Chief Collection again in 2014. We're eventually going to try to get all of them to put it on this nice stack of games that we have in the studio right now that will eventually make it onto a shelf. Hundreds of dollars later.
Yeah.
Donate to us so we can buy these games, please.
And now, for me, we're on to one of my favorite portions of Halo, which was the multiplayer. It's really what got me and my friends into the game. It kept us coming back. And if you haven't played Halo or Halo multiplayer at some point, basic description for you is it's up to 4 players on a console, can do a split screen mode where basically you just screen peek and cheat and piss all your friends off and have a great time doing it.
Have you seen those photos of people who like put cardboard on top of each other?
We did that. We definitely did that because we weren't playing that bullshit.
I was just an honest person. Even to this day, when I play multiplayer with Wellickson, she looks at my screen.
I can't help it. You just kind of go,
where are you at? Where are you at?
Didn't mean to, but I drifted. And sometimes you don't. So yeah, you had your old school couch co-op. You also had the option of linking up to 3 other Xboxes together through a network LAN.
So 4 total.
And 4 controllers on each. So a total of 16 players, which was really awesome. And I was only able to do it once because we were kids, didn't know what a network LAN was. But we had a friend's brother who set us up, and it was such a cool night.
Did you have to have 4 TVs too, or
yes.
could you do? Okay, I was supposed to because you would be like Post-it note size on those little tube televisions.
Yeah, we're playing on like a 21-inch TV. We've got like 16 different cut screens. It's great.
Kids don't know how good they have it today.
No.
I mean, we sound old saying this, but this idea of like you do have that 20-inch tube television. So imagine now dividing that into 4.
Oh yeah, or even splitting it to 2 was weird because you had this weird boxy vision where you had no up and down. It's like, all right, it's either left or right.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So it's really cool. And then another thing that the community helped build was being able to kind of create this Xbox hack where you could tell your Xboxes that you're quote unquote on a LAN network, but be able to play online. It's a really cool thing that let you bypass that LAN need and play with your friends. The biggest issue though, it was super buggy. The game was never really built to play on that. And a lot of players at the time, you didn't have this 100 megabit service to be able to play across, with your friends online. So it just made for an okay experience, but it at least allowed you to do it.
Yeah.
Which was neat. So one of the things I really loved with Halo was the different game types that you had. So you had your classic Slayer, kill or be killed, with various game modes. You can do teams, such and such like that. You had Capture the Flag, another classic.
That's all these game modes that you're about to list are still going on today.
Exactly. And they're game modes that you've seen in a lot of different games, but Halo kind of took their own twist on a lot of it, which is really nice. And one of those twists was Oddball.
Yeah.
And Oddball is basically a game of kind of monkey in the middle, keep away, where one player had to get the skull, which was the oddball, and you basically racked up time holding it. And you weren't able to use guns or grenades, but basically you could
when
use
you were the oddball.
When you had the oddball, correct. You still ran around trying to kill the dude with the oddball to grab it, but basically you couldn't use any weapons, but you could use his melee, which inflicted a huge amount of damage, basically a one-hit kill for the most part.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool. Another classic one you had was King of the Hill. Basically, find the point, sit on the point, earn some points.
Yep.
Once again, various game modes with that. And then lastly, you had Race, which was basically kind of a circuit race, point to point, where it functioned just like Halo. You could shoot some people up, snipe them out, but you just had to make sure that you got to all your points.
So what else was featured in Halo Combat Evolved multiplayer? Like, let's talk about maps and whatnot.
Let's do it. Because one of the most memorable things people think of when you think of Halo Combat Evolved multiplayer was these maps. They expanded the Halo universe. You had had Covenant-styled maps, you had Halo-styled maps, you had human kind of interior-styled maps, which is really
You had
cool.
maps on the ring.
Yes, exactly. And it was these really cool things that a lot of other games at the time had like these just very generic ring maps or jump around maps or just hallway maps. So the original Halo Combat Evolved on Xbox had 13 total multiplayer maps that spanned from smaller maps such as Beaver Creek or Rat Race, which are kind of these more intricate base-to-base or just smaller hallway maps, and some larger ones like Blood Gulch, which you've seen come to life in things like Rooster Teeth's Red versus Blue, which is kind of iconic with like red base, blue base.
Yep.
And then also one, which is one of my favorites, which is Sidewinder, which is kind of this L-shaped box canyon with two mountain bases where you could take a teleporter out to this kind of like little recon base that had a rocket launcher and allowed for vehicles. So it was really cool to be able to have these different modes where it's either more of like an intimate firefight or more of a grand scale battle. One of the other really cool things that multiplayer had offered was when you jumped over to the PC version of it. Not only did it include all these maps that you had, but you had 6 additional maps totaling 19, which we see come to life in the Halo Master Chief Collection.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool to be able to see that.
Something we'll dive into a little more once we get to that episode.
Exactly. And coming from someone, like as a kid, didn't have a PC to play this, it's just really cool to be able to experience that.
Yeah.
And then we touched on this a little bit earlier, but Halo PC multiplayer also gave us 2 exclusive weapons.
And those weapons are?
You had the fuel rod cannon, which we see in later Halo games. One of the big differences you see here is that it used energy ammunition such as the plasma pistol and plasma rifle.
So it was based on a battery percentage and not ammo, like per round.
Exactly. So basically you worked with overheating your gun as you do with most of the other plasma weapons, as opposed to the rounds that we eventually see in the later Halo games. Now this made it a little bit overpowered. As I was testing and playing through it, you could get 5 rounds out immediately without it overheating. Which means that if you took your time, I mean, you could waste that up and still have plenty to keep going without overheating with it.
Yeah.
Which is really neat. And then another weapon that we kind of see a new iteration of is the Flamethrower. And one of the biggest reasons we're not seeing the Flamethrower on the Halo Combat Evolved on Xbox is just the rendering quality you have to do. Doing these real-time flame animations that came out, even the PC was a little tough doing that, because as you're playing around with it and moving the weapon, you only got your full distance if you stayed in one spot.
Yeah.
If you kind of moved around or went with it, you only got a shortened distance, and it wasn't really that effective of a weapon. Playing with it, you had to do at least 2.5-3 seconds of direct damage constantly to even lower shields down.
Yeah, well, remember before Halo Combat Evolved had come to console, they were bragging about that graphics card they had. And one thing that they showed in that little trailer was the card shooting flames. So it kind of makes sense now that it's on the console, they couldn't render it as well as they could. So they had to cut it out until it came back to PC.
Exactly, because on consoles, you're still dealing with such a small kind of console chip that people were really, really like construed by and had these limits. So not being able to render that thing, it made sense not to try and even push that into the console version.
So what's your favorite part about the multiplayer for CE? You grew up on it. So like what are some of your fondest memories of it?
I mean, some of the stuff is just your to start is just your Slayer, your team Slayer, just one-on-one or free-for-all Slayer. It was cool because it allowed you to really get with your friends, find that sniper rifle, find that rocket launcher, and just kind of
eventually shoot your friends for that sniper rifle or rocket launcher.
Yeah, and just be the bane of their existence throughout that. So it's just really cool, and it really paved the way to getting into these different game modes that as a kid, I never really delved into it until I started playing with my friends. And we're like, okay, we've played a lot of Slayer, we've played this, we love these maps, we know the ins and outs, so let's try Oddball. And then that's when you see who is the most maneuverable, who knows the level the best. That was always a thing when you're like, oh, okay, cool, you know how to get to that point.
Yeah, well, it's like you know how to get to that point quickest and hold that point or hide from people, which is always such an interesting strategy that me and my friends would do whenever we were playing some of the later online games.
It was, and it was just a neat experience. And then I'm going to go over just a couple of the levels that like when I played through this again, just really brought back those memories. Like I said, with Blood Gulch, which kind of gone through a couple name changes, some updates as we go, and we're still a map that we see today. But, you know, I was that kid who, in 7th grade talent show, acted out the entire first scene of Red versus Blue.
Phenomenal.
I would say it's the best work to date that I've ever done. And since I was at a pretty strict Catholic school, we had to basically change all the curse words that were in there.
To what? What did you change them to?
Frick and frack and crud and all.
I feel like you'd still get your knuckles bruised for that at a Catholic school.
Oh, we did not get to do it.
Oh, you didn't?
We did the entire thing. There was 6 of us. We did the entire thing, and we got, maybe let's choose something else. And I thought it was one of the greatest things we've ever created. And to this day, I will say it's the greatest thing I've ever done.
I can't wait to do an episode about Red vs. Blue eventually.
Yes.
That's going to be very fun. And the evolution of Rooster Teeth starting from Halo Combat Evolved to now.
It's an amazing run. It's, like I said, it's a company I've followed forever since then. So it's really cool to see that rise. So, like I said, that's one of the big reasons I love Blood Gulch. Another one that I really loved was Beaver Creek, which we also see in Red vs. Blue. But it's one where you were just really tight quarters. It was basically if you took Blood Gulch, chopped it up, smashed it together, and you got real close bases.
Yeah.
Which was really neat. So, and I could talk about these maps all day. I mean, it's just like I said, it's a huge nostalgia trip for me for this multiplayer.
Yeah.
But to keep us on track on this and to keep you guys not here for 5 hours, like I could be here for, I wanted to bring up just a couple more of the really cool like customization options and just kind of alternatives you had in multiplayer.
Yeah.
There wasn't even nearly as much as we're seeing in the later games of customizing armor and things like that.
It was a fraction of what it is today.
And it's kind of what you had back then. It was basically you were able to choose your color. So you had 18 different colors to choose from and go through.
So if you wanted to be a pink Master Chief,
yeah,
you could be a pink Master Chief.
You can be the Turd Master Chief, you can be the Turd Master Chief. You know, you live your life how you want to live it.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that customization started. And then each game mode let you break it down into other types. Like I talked about the option of having teams, having solo, changing the weapon layouts that you could have on the map, the respawn rate, and then also things like the time, kill limit, all those type of scoring options really allowed you to change it up and to kind of make your own modes with your friends.
Yeah.
And the thing is, looking back, as I went through this and just kind of did a bit more research and just my own nostalgia trip with it, for me, the multiplayer was really the most important of that game. I mean, the campaign brought you in, but the multiplayer is why you stayed.
Yeah, it kept you going. As fun as that campaign could have been, you're not going to play it 20 or 30 times.
Exactly. I mean, I may have. But it was a very linear campaign that you could play a couple times with your friends. It was really cool. You could do Legendary. But I think Halo and the multiplayer that Halo brought is really what got people onto Xbox, got them to keep coming back, and got them as loyal Halo fans overall.
Especially, you know, once they were done with the campaign and they started playing the multiplayer. At this point, we're kind of expecting a second game. So what are they going to bring next?
Exactly.
Now that we've gone through this, you know, we spent well over an hour, about an hour and a half talking about all of this. I would like to ask you, Alex, what'd you think of Halo Combat Evolved?
So I touched on this a little bit when we started the campaign. And after playing through this again, right before we initially recorded this, it's a staple in the Halo universe. I hate playing it today.
There are some elements I dislike. I know, the wash, rinse, repeat aspect of that drinking game. Every time we say that, re-listen to this episode, every time we say that, take a shot.
Exactly.
Winner dies.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it was huge that I had to keep playing this over and over and over again. And I get that for level design, it makes sense because you can have me go through the level once and then have me go back and change it up, whether you add flood in, whether you add a whole new texture pack to it.
Well, you got to remember, again, we touched on this 9 months. So it's a little forgivable. A little bit.
A tad bit.
A tad bit.
But I'm saying back then, fantastic. Compared to something I want to play again today, it's just not.
You know, there's one guy that's like, I swear to God, 17 years later, this game will not be as hyped as you think it is. People are going to be like, this game's fucking repetitive. And that guy's going to listen to this podcast and be like, oh my God, I was right.
And you know what, sir? You are right. No, but it goes back to as well, like my real experience with Halo came down to the multiplayer aspect of it. Being able to play some couch co-op with friends, you know, jump into Blood Gulch, jump into Sidewinder, jump into all these maps that like, looking back as we went through, because we were like, dude, we did a little refresher on multiplayer on it. I'm like, oh, that one. Oh, and that one.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was in like Combat Evolved first, like just trying to get that reiteration of like where these maps originated from. That helped like me into my childhood of gaming was really like Halo of itself, and that's what brought me to Microsoft as a loyal Xbox player.
And again, you know, it's the reason we have, I'd like to say gaming we have today. And I agree with you. It's hard to play now. Still a great game, and I think it stands the test of time with some of its elements. You know, again, as we talked about earlier, there's no way that there are people who occasionally go and not only play the first Fallout for nostalgic reasons, but because they genuinely want to play it once in a blue moon. I feel like playing some of these missions. You know, once we get to the timeline with our episodes, we will be doing an episode all about Combat Evolved the Anniversary. Yeah. That'll be a fun one to do. Because when we did do this replay, or we did this playthrough right before, we did it all classic graphics.
Yes, we played on the Master Chief Collection. And
we did cheat, though. Because it was on the Master Chief Collection.
It was the Master Chief Collection.
We should have just taken the original, plugged it in.
We did not bust out an Xbox. That mine is dead. Mine's been dead.
I still got mine from high school.
So we can play that.
We'll do that for Halo 2. We'll do that for everything pre-Xbox One.
Exactly. We'll bust out that clunky-ass, garbage original Xbox controller that's made for a giant, and we'll go ahead and play through it for you guys.
But yeah, overall, this was, I liked having to replay through this and do the research on this. You know, the sources we used, both Halopedia and we used the Halo fandom website. We went over YouTube channel Gamer, the A is a V. You know, they have a video called A History of Cut Halo Games and Concepts, has a lot of good information on it. And then we also used a Vice article. I think it's like the Untold History of Halo. That was a huge source for this episode. I'd say anyone who's interested in a lot of details, go read that article. It's probably a 2 or 3 hour read, just an FYI. Oh, it's so long, but it's so good. I love it. Oh, yeah.
Because you do get that. I mean, what I love today is getting those like behind the scenes of how stuff happened. Like I was talking before, like knowing that they're like just eating pizza, throwing socks.
Yeah, they don't give a fuck.
Yeah, like that's such a cool start to like such an empire. So that's definitely a really cool article. And with this as always too, like as we build this up, like we want to keep hearing from you guys for any like cool stories and sources that you have for these things that we can include in our research.
Yeah, just tell us, because we'd love to even give you a shout out on the show. Like, but by all means, we're not going to try to hoard like where we got this. We're going to say this Reddit user told us this that we didn't know.
Exactly.
Granted, please give us a solid source. Don't just say, well, I heard this. Well, I heard Martin O'Donnell punched women. Be like, do you have a source for this? We want to be as journalistically transparent as possible with our sources. We don't want, again, as I said, we don't want to hoard this. You know, if you want to give us a cool source, by all means, give it.
Well, exactly. And we want to make sure that we're giving the correct information. Like we're doing the research as we can through various sources that as greenlighted by Bungie, that users have given us, that the Vice article and things like that. And we want to make sure that this is as interesting, as accurate as podcast as possible.
Yeah. Minus the 2 playthroughs. We both did a playthrough on our own and then got together and did a playthrough of Combat Evolved. Minus the amount of hours I was put in, about 8 or 9 hours of research went into this. Yeah, and I want to make sure that it's legitimate as possible. Overall, thank you for tuning into episode 1 of Finish the Fight, a Halo podcast. As always, we are on social media. You can find us at FTF HaloCast on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram at Finish the Fight Podcast. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube. And just to know, episode 2 will be coming out 2 weeks from when you hear this episode, and it will be on the Master Chief Collection coming to PC. And with that, I'm your host, Jesse Reiners.
And I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
Halo. It's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.